Sophie Goodman, who's joining us from Deloitte. And Sophie has one of those odd jobs in Deloitte, and all credit to Deloitte for really making good use of people like Pete and Sophie. Sophie is an applied anthropologist. She does business ethnography. She helps organizations to see this phenomenon that we become so blind to what's going on in the world because everything is so obvious, something that we've discussed on the podcast recently, to actually see what's going on, to get up close to the customers and their world. We have this tendency when we make sense of the world outside that we try to be distant and objective and rational, we analyze, and thereby missing the point. So what Sophie tries to do is help businesses, help Deloitte, but also others to actually understand what's going on in the world and get inside the world of those she's looking at. Her talk is called provocatively, The Window, the Mirror, and the Looking Glass, the Value of Ethnography in Business Context. So take it away, Sophie.
Thank you. You guys are so friendly. I get a clap at the beginning. So yeah, an odd job. That's the first time that's been described, but a lot of people do ask me, so I'm going to get this out of the way first. So what is an anthropologist doing at a place like Deloitte? I was in consulting years ago and wanting to get more involved in projects involving organisational culture, because for me, where you spend your time at work, spending a lot of time there, that needs to be a great experience. And I found that we weren't really the consulting firm that I was with at the time. We didn't really have any particular model of culture. It was all a little bit loose. And I was thinking, I'd done my undergrad in anthropology and thought, why aren't more anthropologists in this space? You know, anthropologists study culture. Why aren't more anthropologists in this space? So I looked into it. Roll ahead, I decided, actually, I need to go back to uni. So I did a master's in applied anthropology. And as part of that, I did a thesis on Facebook. Facebook had 400,000 users at the time. Thank you. It was being passed off as a bit of a fad. There were a lot of moral panics going on about youth, and then the location stuff came in, and it's, the burglars are going to know when you're out of your house and you're away on vacation and they're going to come and steal your stuff. But I thought there was something that people were getting from it. What was the value that they were getting from it? So I did my thesis on that, then moved into customer experience. Freelanced in that because I thought, actually, this customer stuff I really feel quite strongly about. So, and instead of anthropologists going and studying far-flung cultures in exotic locations, I thought I can study different kinds of tribes in terms of customer tribes for client organisations. So Deloitte then kind of found me, which was nice. This is very management consulting slide. But this is basically the context that I work in. I sit within the strategy and innovation team, and I do some work within experience design as well. But most of the time, the types of problems that we're working on are where our clients are getting disrupted or know that they're about to be disrupted. Things are happening that they can't quite explain. Perhaps their data is pointing to things, but they actually don't know the why underlying it. So we can also get brought in at this stage where this hasn't worked. Smile, breathe, believe in magic. The unicorns will come. So we can actually even still be brought in. I can still be on projects where there is still the belief is like, have you actually found us a unicorn yet? What's the answer? As if there's one right answer. If we just sort of dig enough, we're going to find the answer. This is where we start. We start with a customer, and this is where I come in terms of, I suppose, my training and my perspective. Customers have choice. They've got a lot of information at their fingertips, and they're trusting institutions less. So for me, I believe that what is a business if it doesn't have customers, and if you don't know what your customers are wanting, what are some of their unmet needs as well, particularly in the space of innovation, then I think you're in a dangerous position. So we start with a customer. If you work in this space, which most of you do, you know this quote. So from Henry Ford, attributed to Henry Ford, if I had asked the people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. around the mass production of the Model T Ford. And yes, he's right. If you had asked them what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Maybe not a horse that looks like that, but it's not actually their job. I don't think it's their job to go out and ask customers. I don't think customer research is where you go out and ask customers, what do you want? Like, I mean, you can, but you can get things like the internet fridge then, that for 17 years hasn't quite gained traction. And it keeps on coming back, and there are some really cool blogs dedicated to this idea of the internet fridge. So why do we research then? Because people do weird stuff, like planking. People use products and services in different ways than originally intended. So YouTube, when it first started, was its little its tagline was your digital video repository. Then it morphed into broadcast yourself. Now that is quite a different value proposition, and that's purely from people interacting with it and turning it into something else. And also, organisations don't always know what customers need, and I mean that with great respect. So this is yes, adult baby food. This was thought at some point that this would be a good idea, particularly for university students. It didn't work and is now proudly shown in the Museum of Product Failures, of which there are now 2 museums of those around the world, and there are another 2 planned. So this is why we research. Let's talk about anthropology for a sec. So anthropology is the academic discipline that studies the human experience, sorry. That's pretty big and broad. We used to say it was culture, and then apparently we now just say human experience to make it even bigger and broader. But that's from actually a careers website on what does a career in anthropology look like? So yes, we apparently see ourselves like Indiana Jones, going off in weird exotic locations, this teeny tiny notebook. So today I really love to show you a little bit of a different view of what anthropology can look like. Looks like this. It's not exactly an exciting location. It's kind of doing everyday normal stuff and trying to make sense of it. It also looks like this. It's in people's homes or workplaces, and it's with multiple people rather than the Lone Ranger Indiana Jones. And also looks like this. It's messy, but it's also rigorous in terms of the analysis and synthesis that goes on and the data that we collect. So let's talk about ethnography, which is the anthropologist's research tool. Ethnography is a qualitative research method, basically, where it prioritises the understanding of the point of view of the person or the group being studied, and does this through spending time with them in their natural environment. Natural environment is really important, and observing and participating with them in their normal life. 3 key concepts about what ethnography is participant observation. So the researcher, the ethnographer, morphs these 2 points of view together. So participant observation. So we're the clinical, scientific, lab coat, clipboard observer. It's objective, it's kind of removed, but we're also in it, actually participating in their life as much as possible. So when I go out to people's homes, it depends on the research topic, obviously, in our question, but day traders, teach me how you place a trade. So I'm there with you when the market opens, or actually just before. What are your rituals before you start? As well as, let me see sort of how the market's performing. It's live. What decisions are you making, etc. Teach me as if I needed to do this, take over from you for an hour or something like that. And it's putting those 2 perspectives together. Thick description is we're not just describing a little isolated moment or thing. We are putting it within the context at which it occurs. So behaviour can change depending on the context. So it's putting those 2 together in order to richly describe what's happening. And deep hanging out, which is pretty cool, because sometimes I tell people that that's my job. I get to go and hang out with customers, but it's purposeful, very purposeful. There's something about spending time with people that you start to build a different type of trust and a different type of rapport, the longer you sort of spend with them, being there in the moment as stuff happens, and there are some beautiful moments where things that were completely unplanned, because you're trying as much as possible to be in their natural environment and taking part of their natural everyday stuff, is that sometimes you just get to find out things that you wouldn't normally if you were trying to structure it so much. So ethnography, in terms of disruptive and where I think some of its power comes from, is its ability to look, to question and to learn from that. How I think it does it is because it's immersive and it's embodied. So the researcher, through that participant observation, learns. You get it? It's a different type of knowledge because you've been there, you've experienced it with them, and you're also understanding the context around it. What job is it that they're trying to get done? What are their frustrations? And also what are their moments that actually, moments that matter, but the moments where they've been delighted. And you can see that. And you can also see some of that, the interaction with families as well. And so when you're in their homes, they can be cooking you meals and all sorts of stuff. And it's something very different from actually being there and experiencing it. It's empathetic. We experience things with people, not at them, not clinically removed. We have that perspective, but we're also flipping it and doing the participatory aspect as well. We're curious, we're insanely curious. I've got a joke in at work that you can put me on any project. A lot of consultants will come in and they'll want a particular industry, et cetera, and my joke is that you can put me on anything because I find everything fascinating. We question accepted knowledge. And I think I didn't really get that this was such a thing about the way an ethnographer works until I kind of got into Deloitte, I think. And then I've noticed that seems to be a bit of the thing that people will now expect of me. Questioning accepted knowledge. So whose knowledge is this? How was this constructed? When was this constructed? When has this actually been looked at again? We embrace ambiguity. We actually, at work, we do have, a measure of success in terms of trying to help people come into the firm is you need to be comfortable with ambiguity. And that can be really tough. But I think through the training in terms of an anthropology degree, you do learn that actually this is okay, this is all right. Like, you can be comfortable with it. It may not necessarily be something that you seek out all the time, but you can be comfortable with it and work in it. And we recognise patterns, of course, because to do all this sort of stuff, we need to actually make sense of it as well. But we can't do it on our own. And I think that's where I've seen the power of ethnography really take off in terms of business context because of the diverse teams that I'm placed with. So I can get hardcore strategy consultants, I can get incredibly creative designers, and you get me in there and you get a couple of others, a subject matter expert or whatever. And it's from that combination that I think some really cool stuff happens. So what does a research project look like? Quite often we can be the first project in a large transformation program that spans years, and because we're starting with the customer. Okay, let's start here. Or we can also be running more of a customer strategy project where this is the research component. So it pretty much looks like this. It's prepare, conduct, analyse, deliver, and all those little activities underneath. So pretty standard, but this is the more interesting stuff, I think, that goes on. There's this sense-making process that goes on between the researchers or research team, the client, and the wider project team. So some of that diversity that I was mentioning just before is that we are making sense of the environment together. And I think this is where we get better outcomes. And more impact, long-lasting impact with clients, is when we're going through this iterative, collaborative process of sense-making. So where do we look to understand disruption? This is, I think, we first start where we look in, we look at that mirror, we sort of reflect back the organisation. We start to frame the problem by understanding the internal view, how the business works, the capabilities of the organisation. Then we look out through the window, to understand the industry context, the trends that are happening, as well as a competitor. What is the competitive landscape like? But what I'm wanting to encourage you guys to think about today is to include a bit of an ethnographic lens, because this is all good stuff, but leave it behind to a certain degree. So, and I think this is what ethnography does, is that this is all good. This is preparation for field work to go out and study people or a topic, but also I'm going to park that for now because I'm going to go and look at it in a different way. So this is kind of like the looking glass, and the looking glass is kind of a weird thing to try and visually represent, but that's the closest I got to it. It's a little bit skewy. It's not quite sort of familiar, but it kind of looks like fun too, right? So how do we look ethnographically? This is something that I was kind of taught over years at uni, and I feel very fortunate that I found an academic discipline that kind of my brain fits into. But this is the closest that I have found to an actual practical tool to try and articulate how an anthropologist or doing ethnographic research looks at the world and thinks. So this is a book called Look by James H. Gilmore. H is important. And he released this in 2016 when I was at a conference overseas for ethnography. It's called EPIC. It's pretty epic. It's awesome. A bunch of ethnographers and anthropologists getting together from around the world. It's pretty amazing. He introduced this, he launched the book at EPIC, and he has based this book on de Bono's 6 hats. So instead of the hats, he's talking about the looking glasses. These are the looking glasses. So binoculars were used to look across and survey at a distance. Let's get the big picture. We have bifocals to go in between contrasting views or directions to look at something a little bit differently there. We've also got the magnifying glass to really look closely, hone in on one particular thing and study it. Then we've got microscopes to look around for more and greater details that sort of zoom in. Do you remember it, like the Bunsen burner kind of stuff at school? Is that the microscope, you're kind of zooming in and out and you're seeing different things at each sort of level of magnification. Rose-coloured glasses, let's look at something as if it was better than it actually was. Let's look for the positives in it. And then the blindfolds is about looking back, to sort of look at your looking, to go, is there something that we have missed here? And you can have different kind of combinations of these together. So kind of go, is there a way that we have not looked at this situation just yet? I wanted to share some quick stories about some organisations and ethnographic research and how they've used it. So 2 of these organisations have used ethnographic research and 1 hasn't. They may be colour-coded. So Netflix hired an anthropologist, and I think he's still sort of I think he's still on their books actually, as just a continuous advisor, called Grant McCracken. He's written several books as well, but Grant helped them understand binge watching, the phenomenon of binge watching. And he actually thought that it's better to be called feasting, because instead of this binging sort of addictive soul activity that's done sort of on your own, blah, 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 he actually went out to all sorts of homes and watched people watch TV, which is pretty cool. It's kind of like Gogglebox on steroids. And he was like, it's actually feasting. There are sort of people are doing some interesting stuff around this because they're consuming it with people. It's not this sad little sort of binging sort of thing that you do on your own. And so consequently Netflix has altered some of its algorithms and services that it provides to its customers. Lego was making money for like 60 years apparently. I mean, it's amazing case study. But then it wasn't for like 10. And it's privately owned family business, and it was sort of helping to keep it afloat, but they weren't quite sure what was really going on. So they actually commissioned the largest ethnographic study around the world of play. And so went into homes of families and to understand play. Because they were thinking or being told that it was this Lego's Lego's done and dusted basically, because this new age of iPads, instant gratification, can't compete, and kids want instant gratification. So, we're not quite sure where the bricks is with that. They had diversified so much that they actually opened theme parks. Anybody heard of that? I hadn't heard of that. Theme parks, right? So, and they were doing all sorts of sort of strange stuff. So, anyway, the ethnographic team went out and they came back with a bunch of insights. One of those being this instant gratification thing. This is kind of a myth. This is actually more about kids are wanting to reach mastery, and they're wanting creativity, and they're wanting to be able to think a little bit more broadly. There was one kid who they said, "What's your most prized possession?" And he said it was his sneakers. And his sneakers were all rough and scuffed and all sorts of stuff. They said, why? Why are they the most prized possession? And it's because those scuff marks were the actual reason, because it meant that he had perfected a skateboarding trick. And so there's this thing about kind of, actually kids are wanting to reach mastery. They're wanting to actually really sort of hone in on a craft. Amazing story, right? Lego is like the biggest toy company in the world. Now Nokia, there's an ethnographic researcher called Tricia Wang. She's done a TEDx talk. It's amazing. She talks about how thick data needs to be matched with big data. So she went to Nokia. She'd been studying emerging tech use in emerging countries. And she went to Nokia and said, hey, this smartphone thing is going to be big. And they went, no, it's not. Because our data is telling us that it's not. None of our data is pointing at this. So she was saying, well, my data is telling you that it is. I've been there, I've lived with people, and this is what they're after. So anyway, we know what happened to Nokia. So on leaving you today, I want to finish off with this idea, this principle of making the strange familiar and the familiar strange, which is something that in social sciences, definitely anthropology, we talk about, as in what our job kind of is. And this quote from Amy Herman, who wrote a book called Visual Intelligence. She actually trains the FBI, its agents, how to observe, which is pretty cool. So we can survive and thrive today if we know how to see what's there and that others don't, to see what's not there that should be, to see the opportunity, the solution, the warning signs, the quickest way, the way out, the win, to see what matters. And this, with those looking glasses, is hopefully a nice practical way as a bit of a takeaway from today. Thank you.